Book 3, The Mansions of Idumea, Chapter 26. Snakes, cats, I know you hate them all. Going to bed and going to sleep are two different things. Sleep wouldn't be coming for a very long time, especially since Perrin had awoken from a long forced nap just a few hours ago. He sat on the narrow bed in the small adjoining room and tried to think of what to think. He couldn't concentrate on anything for any length of time because a little old man kept butting into his thoughts. Hogel Denzil kicked away garters, pushed out the administrators and officers, and gently nudged his parents to the side, so he could stand in the middle of Perrin's mind with his mischievous smile and his eyebrows waggling. Perrin couldn't put out of his mind his first trip to Edge. The memory nagged him, insisted on being revisited. So Perrin indulged it, just to have something different to think about, and to be rid of it. He'd been 18 when he was sent to Edge, and he remembered staring glumly at the little old man and woman he was to stay with. They'd shrunk in the years since he'd seen them last, and were more wrinkled. He folded his brawny arms across his broad chest as he evaluated them in front of their small stone house, and that ridiculously tiny village, against those ugly, rocky mountains. He'd been hoping for a season at Waves, or even Coast, but he was stuck at the edge of nothing. Hogel Denzil had smiled at him and said, "Plan to serve the world as a general, I understand." "Of course," he replied arrogantly. Everything that came out of his mouth in those days was smug, prideful, disdainful. Any variety of haughtiness he hadn't mastered. "Good, good." Hogel eyed him in a way that seemed to pierce straight through his conceit and into his soul. "Then you're here to learn how to do the first part of that sentence, while your father will train you to do the second part at the end of the season." "The first part?" young Perrin had asked, trying to remember what it was. Rector Denzil smiled kindly, but his eyes were on fire. "The serve part. No leader is truly great who doesn't know how to serve. Service first, leadership later. First rule of leadership." "No, it's not," Perrin retorted. "First rule of leadership is to identify the rival and eliminate it through defeat or feigned friendship." Hogel sighed. "A true product of the King's educational system. Learned your lessons well, I see. We do things differently here in Edge. No king has been here for many years, and we like it that way. Trust me, to be a great leader, you need to be a great servant. You'll begin tomorrow at a widow's house not far from here. She has a large herd, no children, and lots of feed to gather in." "Baling feed? The son of the High General of Idumea baling feed!" "Don't worry. No one here knows your parentage. I told everyone my nephew from Quake was coming for weeding season, and he's a little daft." Hogel smiled and tapped his head. "Tell the village whatever you want. No one will believe who you think you are." "I'm not standing for this," Perrin had huffed. "I'm going home." "My wife's niece is adamant that you stay," Hogel said pleasantly. "You have no choice. Steal a horse to go home, they won't let you into the army. I'll report you as a thief. Tell a lie to get out of here, I'll send lies back to your home ahead of you. Who are they going to believe more, a teenage boy or a revered rector?" He was more wily than anyone realized. "I won't work," Perrin had threatened. "Then you won't eat," said Hogel simply. "Everyone works for what they get. So will you. In fact, there are still a few hours of daylight. We're going to that widow's house right now to let you get a start." "What?" "Are you hungry? Is that the problem?" "Yes, part of it." "Then you'll work for your dinner. And your great-aunt makes a wonderful berry pie. You really don't want to miss that." Older Perrin sat on the bed, remembering that walk to the widow's house. 10 years later, he had looked for her when he came back to Edge as the captain, but she'd already died, and she wasn't even that old. He tried to picture her now. When one is 18, everyone older than 25 might as well be grandparents. No, she wasn't a grandmother. She was probably not even 45. close to Mari's age, a widow. He gripped his head and rubbed it. Hogel, what do you want from me? What's the purpose of this? The memory wouldn't leave, not without being attended to. Perrin had been working for about 2 weeks on the farm when he realized the cut hay never seemed to end. He was sure that when he baled and moved the feed, Hogel had sent other farmers to throw in more in the field at night just to keep him busy. There wasn't much else to do while working in the hot sun. No friends to ride with, no girls to chat up. It was the lack of girls that bothered him the most. Finding women had been the reason he wanted to see the world to begin with. Yes, there had been something between Ursula Cush and him, more than just false accusations and scars from sticks. Their teenage years had run cold and hot, dangerous and stupid, back and forth. It was during one of those cold periods that the 16-year-old Ursula caught the eye of an older third-year cadet named Cain Thorne. Only years later did Perrin suspect that Ursula pursued Cain to make Perrin jealous. But 16-year-old boys simply don't notice such games. He was too busy realizing there were many other officers in the world with daughters, and all of them quite happy to visit Idumea with their fathers, and be shown around the garrison by the strapping and, he was loath to admit, rakish son of the High General. They eagerly accepted his invitation to see the secrets of the garrison he told them only he knew. It was a stupid line to offer them his private tour, but it always worked. He couldn't even remember how many girls there had been in those years. At least a dozen, but likely many more. All of them were quick to swoon, then just as quickly were conquered and crushed. He didn't even remember their names. They were just silly girls who were too willing and vulnerable for their own good. And in those days, Perrin was up to no good. Before he entered command school, he wanted to do a little exploring. That was true. But he wasn't interested in scenery or villages, only in finding a challenging conquest. Instead, he found only mindless repetition in baling hay. And he reminded himself with recurring gratitude, not an 18-year-old Maripedo. Any relationship they would have had then would have been disastrous. The only female he had contact with, besides his great-aunt, was an older woman. No, a woman still in the prime of life, bringing him cool water and smiling gratefully at him every day. Then older Perrin remembered something else. Every night, Hogel kept him there in his little house and read out loud to him, usually from the writings, but also from some older books. A few times Perrin had tried to sneak out to see the action down in the village green, but his uncle always blocked him, and only out of politeness and dread of punishment by his parents did he not push the old man away. You said you were too tired to help me milk the cow, so you must be too tired to see any of the village. Besides, they all think you're mad, and no one wants to be seen talking to you. But I'll talk to you. Tell me, Perrin, what's life like in Idumea? Tell me everything. And I mean everything I've been missing. So Perrin did, trying to prove to Hogel Denzil how dismal Edge was in comparison. Hogel listened attentively, as did Perrin's Aunt Tabit, and asked thoughtful questions. I'm afraid I don't understand about the houses near the pools, Perrin, Auntie Tabit once asked. Why do people want to be so close to something that could destroy them? But they rarely do. Only once in a while does one erupt, and only once in a while does a house go down in one when the crust breaks. Not that many people die each year. Isn't just one death enough to discourage people? Hogel said. And if there's land away from the danger, why play so close to the edge of it? I knew of a man who wanted to drive carriages along the cliffs and coast and give people views of the sea, he said thoughtfully. He told the carriage owner he could get very close to the edge without sliding off and into the sea. He didn't get the job. The carriage owner wanted someone who could drive the farthest away from the edge, away from the danger. Perrin rolled his eyes. I've heard that story before. It's even older than you, and it wasn't your friend. You just made that part up. But Hogel was undaunted. It's like teasing a poisonous snake. You may avoid getting hit for a while, but your chances of escaping unharmed decrease the longer you taunt it. My thinking? Live a long life by avoiding the snakes altogether. Every night Perrin was exposed to a little more Hogel-Densel thinking, and every day as he baled the never-ending hay, he thought of ways to argue against the old man. At dinner he'd challenge an idea from the night before, and the old rector always seemed to have a way to counter his arguments. When Perrin discovered that Hogel was using ideas from the writings, that's when he started to study them too, just to find ways to anticipate his arguments and punch holes into his thinking. But Perrin had fallen into Hogel's trap. Studying so intently didn't give him weapons against Rector Densel, but destroyed his Idumean theories instead. He felt his arguments weakening, his ideas changing, his heart softening. He didn't fully notice until it was almost time to go. 1 week before he was to return to Idumea, he nearly finished the baling. In the late afternoon, the widow came out of her house to point Perrin down the road. A large herd of cattle was making its way down the quiet dirt road to her corral. My brother's been keeping them for me until I could take them again. My husband's herd. And now I can feed them all raining season with what you've put away. I'm going to survive thanks to you. You've saved me. And she kissed his cheek. That night after dinner, which he ate quietly, still thinking about what the woman said to him, Hogel cracked his knuckles and said, "What are we to argue tonight, my boy?" "I don't feel like arguing." "Because it's useless? Because you keep losing to me?" "Because I'm tired," Perrin said evasively, "and I'm thinking of other things." "Because you're finally thinking there's more to life than just getting what you want, isn't there?" Hogel said. "Life is about taking care of others, not yourself. When you finally feel that in your heart, Perrin, you will be a great leader. Not a leader the king would be proud of, but one the Creator would be proud of." The 43-year-old Perrin held his head again and rubbed his temples. "Hogel, Hogel," he muttered, "I am taking care of others. I'm trying to find the source of all of this. I'm trying to make a safer world for the woman you tricked me into debating and the children we have. I am serving them and all of Idumea." No, you're not, my boy." Perrin heard the words distinctly as they were announced in his mind. "You're serving your rage and anger. I haven't seen that pride in you in years. Come now, Perrin. Let it go. Come back to Edge." "Just give me some time, Hogel. I can get to the root of this. I can solve it. Just a few weeks." "Why play with danger, Perrin? If you insist on staying, they will get you. Snakes, cats, I know you hate them all. So why mess with them?" "But my parents don't want you here, my boy. Are you doing it for them or for yourself? Staying here will end in death. Yours. Don't leave another widow in Edge. There's another plan for you, my boy. You've changed your path before, now do it again. Don't take the wrong path." Perrin lay down on the bed, weary from the wrestling in his mind. He remembered when he went home to Idumea after that season. Hogel had given him a copy of the writings, and Tabit had given him a huge pie that turned into a messy but delicious sludge in his pack on the horse. He licked it all clean. But before he left, he spent most of that last night confessing to Rector Densel all he had ever done, and to whom, well, as many of the poor girls he could remember. His great-uncle listened carefully, never interrupting. When Perrin finally finished all the torrid details, Hogel said, "The past is behind you, my boy, and the world is before you. Now head out on the right path. Remember how we talked about the refuser? He hated you then, and he held you securely in his grip. But you escaped him, my boy. With the Creator, we freed you that night." That night, the self-indulgent boy vanished, and what returned to Idumea was a refocused young man. Suddenly realizing he wasn't the center of the cosmos, changed the way he viewed everything. Gone was his desire to conquer hapless, hopeless females, but instead to conquer himself. Ralph Shin thought his son had grown 3 inches taller while he was away, but Perrin knew he'd actually learned how to walk with a better purpose. The refuser hates you even more now, and he wants to destroy you. If you stay, you'll give him ample opportunities. Perrin, go home. Back in Idumea, he occasionally ran into some of those girls from his past, still optimistic despite him treating them like cheap paper that he used once and tossed away. He usually met them at those wretched dances his mother forced him to attend, but he'd use those few minutes on the dance floor with his past victims to tell them he was sorry for his treatment of them, and then he'd sneak out of the building when his mother wasn't looking. The closeness of the young women nearly drove him from his resolve to have no contact with females, and he knew there were many more girls he missed apologizing to. That was another reason he dreaded returning to Idumea. He wasn't sure if someone's wife or a woman he politely tipped his cap to along the busy roads in the past few weeks wasn't someone he once took advantage of. On more than one occasion, he felt a female's eyes on him longer than was necessary, and he worried that it may have been someone still justifiably harboring a grudge, or worse, lingering feelings. The last thing he wanted was an uncomfortable meeting in front of his unsuspecting wife and innocent children. The only encounter, though, was running into Ursula. She probably was still clinging to her adolescent feelings for him, unless Idumea had a new custom to express sympathy by attacking the bereaved with one's lips. Never had Perrin been so happy to have his wife by his side as he was when Ursula approached them at the dinner. Not only because he used Mari as a buffer, but because the comparison between what he used to want and what he had now was so extreme. Deciding to have no relationships with women for 10 years had purged his soul and taught him what he really wanted in a companion. Little wonder, then, that when he finally met Mari at age 28, he had no idea how to properly court her. Not only was he rusty in talking with women, the kinds of conversations he'd had as a teenager were all focused solely on achieving one selfish result. He didn't know then how to tell a woman he wanted to give her his soul. Fortunately, Mari figured it out. And still, she loved him, in spite of himself. He told her everything that night after the dinner. He'd already explained a bit as to why he'd been an edge as an 18-year-old, but that night he felt he needed to explain a few more things. Even though Hogel had told him his past was forgiven and gone, and reminded him just before he married that he needn't burden Mari about the boy he used to be, Perrin had always felt a bit dishonest. And now, with his past crowding him on every side, he decided Mari needed to know why he grew more anxious each day. So he spilled everything. About Ursula, their past, and why he didn't want her over for dinner. About the rest of the innocent girls, his shameful roguishness. He'd wrapped himself around her in their bed that night, partly so that he could feel her responses to his confession, but more so because he feared that once she learned what kind of a young man he had been, she'd never allow his arms around her again. She'd lain there, patient and motionless, listening to the stories of a sordid youth, and when he finished, she remained quiet for several minutes. He'd squeezed his eyes shut in the dark bedroom, waiting anxiously for her verdict. Eventually, she startled him by kissing his lips, returning his embrace, and confiding that somehow she always knew he had a past, but she also knew he wasn't that man anymore. He didn't try to mask the tears of relief that slid down his face onto hers, and concluded that only a woman from Edge could love him so intensely and forgive him of so much. Only a few short hours later came that cold, snowy morning, then the frantic ride back to Edge. It wasn't hard to understand why he loved Edge so deeply. The little village had grown on him, and now Edge had grown up before him. Even his old hayfield had been recently taken over by the edge of Idumea housing development, but he would make it a point of riding by frequently just to remember what he'd been and what he was now. And now that he was an officer with a beautiful and trusting daughter, he hated what he had been even more. That was it. It slapped him cold and clear. Suddenly he understood as he stared up at the ceiling. He didn't hate Idumea as much as he hated who Perrin was in Idumea. That's right, my boy, so don't take the wrong path again. Come back home to Edge. Message received, Hogel, Perrin whispered to the darkening room. Edge was where he found his purpose, his soul, his family, and even forgiveness. But even though he understood, it didn't mean it was easy to let go. The pain in his chest demanded he get to the bottom of all of this, to find out who sits in that filthy pit and spews out the orders that killed his parents while they slept. Shem claimed they were happy in paradise, but how could that be enough? Perrin couldn't imagine how he could ever sleep that night, but somehow he did. And then he was sitting, and a small child, a boy maybe 5 years old, was leaning against his knee, intent on telling him something. It was amusing. Perrin laughed. He saw other children and people, lots of them, listening and laughing. The child smiled at him, unsure of what he said that was funny, but enjoying the attention. There was something familiar about the children, or rather something that would be familiar about them. Perrin took control of the dream. If he could just turn his head to see what was behind him, if there was a structure of some kind, a house of weathered gray wood with window boxes filled with herb plants. Perrin could tell he was awake, but he didn't bother to open his eyes. The scent of rain filled the morning air, and for a few glorious moments he wasn't sure where he was as he let the heavy humidity weigh him down on the bed. He concentrated on that little boy, trying to remember the details of his face that were already blurring away. But then everything came back to him. The guest quarters, the garrison, the burial. Something dark and twisting and bitter spread through his chest. But just as suddenly as it rose, another feeling overcame him, curiously warm. And then it grew. It grew until it glowed hot like a fire on a cold, rainy night, engulfing the dark. The heat dissolved the sorrow and filled his entire body until there was nothing left but a new and unexpected feeling. Joy. Pure joy. In the space above his heart, he felt the pressure from the evening before, as if two warm hands pressed past his flesh to touch his soul. He knew he was smiling. His face hadn't been in that position for so long it felt almost unnatural. A memory came to him, as clear as if it was happening at that moment. He was a little boy, not yet old enough for school, lying in bed listening to a thunderstorm tearing through the night. He ran to his parents' room, not because he was scared, he told himself, but because he needed to make sure his parents were all right. Besides, their bed was always warmer. He had crawled over his sleeping father to slip under the blankets between his parents. His father placed a warm, heavy hand on his chest. "I appreciate your concern, son, but the storm can't touch me here," Ralph had told him groggily. Joriana had kissed his head and placed her warm hand on his chest as well, interlacing her fingers with her husband's. "But you can stay with us until morning, Perrin, just to make sure we're all right." And he had. Perrin didn't know he even had any more tears as he laid there with his eyes still shut. But these tears came for a different reason. As they slid down his face, they released the last of the weighty burden that had sat on his shoulders all night like coffins. Light filled the room that Perrin could discern even through his closed eyelids. The warm pressure on his chest expanded his lungs fully for the first time in days, willing him to go on. "I'm glad you're all right," he whispered to the presence that surrounded him, "and that nothing can touch you now. I'll be fine too. eventually, and I'm going home to Edge. The pressure pushed tenderly into his chest and straight into his soul. The presence filled him so completely, he was sure he would feel some of it for the rest of his life. He knew it was morning. He knew it was time to get up. He knew it was time to leave. He hated to break the moment, but he also knew the moment was his forever. He opened his eyes to greet the light. Outside, the dark, heavy clouds continued to rain, and there was no fire lit yet in the guest quarters. But Perrin's room was inexplicably bright and warm. In the next room, Shem woke with a start in his narrow bed to see Perrin standing over him like a great black shadow. Up, Zenas! We have administrators to face. Then we go home. His voice sounded like the man Shem always knew. Shem grinned and sat up as Perrin plopped down next to him, his eyes remarkably soft. You saw them, didn't you? Shem said reverently. Perrin shook his head, but smiled. Better. I felt them. He put an arm around Shem. I told you recently that you missed your calling, that you should have been a builder. I've changed my mind. Shem, you should have been a guide. Impulsively, he kissed him on the forehead. Come on, little brother. We have scary old men to face, then we go home to Edge. Shem sighed in relief. Good, because, Perrin, I have to say this, and I hope you don't take it the wrong way. I know this is your home and everything, but I'm so glad we're leaving. I have to admit it, I really hate Idumea. For the first time in days, Perrin laughed. They looked for Gadaman everywhere in Idumea, but he wasn't in his office, not at his usual inn taking his usual meal, boiled beef, 1 fried potato, 1 slice of black bread with onion, without fail, and he wasn't at home. His housekeeper, a woman with a pinched face and a scowl likely acquired from working for the Administrator of Loyalty for so many years, told Dr. Brizek that morning, He went out last night for the burial and never came back. What he does is his own business. Now, unless you want something else, I have a gathering room to sweep. Dr. Brizek went back to the headquarters early that morning, baffled. Nico, he reported to the chairman, he's simply vanished. He was seen at the burial last night, but then he gave me the slip again. I sent out 10 men searching last night, and all reported back this morning they found nothing. He never went home last night. Mal considered this. He'd know we'd want him for the hearing this morning. I'm sure someone got him the message. You'd think this is precisely the kind of thing he'd be eager to show his face for. I don't get it. The doctor sat in his chair and sighed. Must have done something out of the ordinary. Maybe the weasel went out to celebrate at a tavern for the first time and didn't know how to hold his mead, Mal guessed. He's likely under some filthy table, wondering why his hair is stuck to the floor. The men chuckled. Ah, well, we can proceed without him, Brizek decided. I'll make some excuse for him. In the meantime, is everything ready? Oh, yes, Mal nodded. Perrin's not going to know what hit him, nor will he know what to do with his new little buddy. His father spoke to him last night, and I imagine he still hasn't stopped salivating. He's untested, though, worried Brizek. We haven't even started his training. That was supposed to begin after graduation. We don't need to train him, Mal said simply. All we need to tell him is that he's going in as the new captain. Brizek squinted. Nothing more. He'll be useless to us. Oh, he'll become useful, Mal assured him. As you pointed out, we haven't trained him sufficiently for the task, but there's someone very close to the situation who can train him for us. And I suspect that after all he's witnessed here, he'll be most willing. Mal clasped his hands on his lap. The quiet man is about to receive his first direct assignment, after all these years. It's almost become too easy, my good doctor, too easy. There's something soothing about plunging one's hands into soapy water, even if it's to scrub the mud out of work clothes for the second time that day. The warmth, the repetition, the evidence that something was improving. A sense that while everything else was spinning out of one's control, at least the clothes were relatively clean. In the washing room, one small corner of the world was in Mari's power, even if it meant she scrubbed Pato's work trousers so hard that the knee was wearing thin. But she wasn't about to stop until the work clothes were bright again. Something had to be, because everything else for the past 2 days and nights had been dark and heavy. There had been no news. Nothing since the long second message arrived from General Cush an hour after Shem rode away from their house. The message detailed what had happened that awful morning when Ralph and Joriana were discovered stabbed to death in their bed by one of the maids. 3 guarders and 2 soldiers were killed. One was seriously injured, and Riplak had come up missing. Kindiri was found bludgeoned and unconscious in the great hall, but the 2 maids upstairs had slept through it all until the morning. Then, no more news. Yesterday was the longest day for Mari. The burial was to have been yesterday evening, according to Cush's message. Perhaps Perrin and Shem made it to Idumea. Unless... Today had proved to be as slow and unbearable as yesterday. Mari, Jatsi, and Pato sifted rubble and moved debris again. Anything to distract their imaginations from what might be happening in the middle of the world. They kept their heads low to avoid speaking to anyone, but it didn't help. Again, villagers hurried over to hug them, weep for a few minutes, tell them how brave General Shin was, how lovely Mrs. Shin seemed to be, and, worst of all, to ask how the colonel was handling the news. The only thing Mari could say was, "He's gone to Idumea. Thank you for your concern. Can I help you with that rock now?" But there were a few people whose embraces she gratefully accepted. "Oh, Miss Mari, I've been looking all over for you," Tyria Rigoff called as she rushed over to the Shins while they were adding broken dishes to a rubbish wagon. "Milo told me there's still no word?" Mari tried to smile bravely at one of her favorite former students, but it was a pitiful attempt. "No, nothing yet," was all she could whisper. Only the fort knew that Perrin had left in a fit of temper and was followed by Shem. Tyria sighed. "And what about the sergeant that Karna sent after them?" "Haven't heard back from him either," Mari murmured. "Then send out more," Tyria insisted. "Milo said Lieutenant Rigoff is needed here, as are all of the other soldiers," Mari said firmly. "Karna told me last night he'd go himself, but I told him no. Edge needs its major, especially now. Look around, Tyria. The village is still a mess. Every man is needed. Besides," she said in a quieter tone, to avoid the attention of edgers trying to listen in as they dropped more rubbish into the wagon, "this is a family matter." Tyria narrowed her eyes. "Miss Mari, others may not remember, but I certainly do. You taught us that we are all family. Colonel Shin and Master Sergeant Zenas are like my brothers. I've known them since I was a teenager. I volunteer my husband to find my brothers. And Po Healy wants to help too. Just say the word." Mari couldn't fight the tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Tyria," she said. "Maybe tomorrow, if we have no news." Tyria nodded, satisfied that Mari was finally considering accepting help. "They'll be fine, Miss Mari. I know it." Mari sighed. "No, you don't, Tyria. What did we discuss in class about knowing?" Tyria smiled dutifully. She never forgot a lesson. "That we shouldn't claim to know something unless we really do. That what we know isn't the same as what we hope for." "So," said Mari analytically, "you don't know that they're all right. Neither do I. All we can do is—" She faltered, unable to keep up the pretense of teacher. And Tyria was no longer her student, as she hugged Mari again. "Then I hope," she whispered, "with all that I have, and I'll cling to that to get me through until we hear something more, just as you will." "Very good, Tyria," Mari sniffed. "There's a reason you were always my favorite student." "And not just because I married the lieutenant you thought was a perfect match for me?" Mari almost managed to smile. That helped, I must admit. Tyria released Mari. I also feel it, she said quietly. Although I know we can be deceived by our feelings, but I feel a sense of calm when I think about them. While Mari did too, it was the lack of news which was most distressing, the not knowing. But as Mari scrubbed Jatesy's tunic, she had an idea. If only the administrators would realize no one read the notices they forced the printers to create, maybe they'd let them send out useful updates instead about discoveries, improvements, bodies found along the side of the road. Maybe not. As she wrung out Jatesy's tunic, she tried to concentrate on what would need to be done tomorrow. But all she could think of were bodies on the side of the road. If someone found Perrin or Shem lying injured or worse, how would they know who he was? Names, Mari thought, as she held up Jatesy's light brown top, now a permanently darker brown. Names needed to be on their uniforms, or on papers in their pockets, or maybe even engraved on thin pieces of metal hung around their necks. Something to identify who they are and tell others where to return them. Mari set aside the tunic and put one of her skirts in the warm water, feeling badly again for the poor sergeant sent out after Perrin and Shem. He finally arrived back in Edge that afternoon, about 2 hours after Mari had spoken to Tyria. Major Karna and the sergeant brought the news to Mari as she worked at a neighbor's house. He made it only as far as the first messenger station, Karna sighed. Jatesy and Pato came over for their work to hear the update. And, did you see them? Mari asked with her hands balled in nervous fists. Ma'am, they were there all right, the sergeant replied, with contempt dripping from his voice. He tried to keep it low to avoid sharing the news of his commander, but several people in the area were leaning subtly over to hear. Gossip was a major pastime in Edge, and with the entertainments temporarily halted, the saga of the Shins was the most popular distraction in the entire village. I didn't steal 2 horses or beat up messengers, ma'am, but I was the one who spent a day and 2 nights locked up in incarceration, just because I was in uniform and showed up 10 minutes after their tantrums. Oh, dear, Mari rubbed her cheeks. Karna had looked at Mari apologetically. I'm rather surprised we haven't heard anything more from Idumea. With all due respect to the High General's memory, no news doesn't always mean no news. We need to consider the possibility that they never got there. Mari nodded sadly. I'm sorry, Mari, Brillin continued. I fear we've already waited too long. I'm pulling 40 men from the reconstruction efforts and sending them out immediately to look. Mari shook her head. No, Major, the soldiers are needed for securing Edge. We can spare some men for our commander, Mrs. Shin. And besides, he added, with a dismal twinkle in his eye, it's not exactly appropriate for you to tell the second-in-command what to do with his soldiers. Sorry, Major, she said meekly. I just see this as more of a family concern. So do I, Mari. Perrin once gave me a copy of the writings, and I do remember that the first line is, we are all family. Mari sniffled, knowing that Perrin thought Brillin hadn't ever opened it. Then I suggest to my family that we wait till morning. If we hear nothing, then send out a search party. Mari used all of her worry to vigorously scrub out a stain in her skirt, ignoring the fact that she was rubbing out the dye as well. The fort had been most helpful. Guards were posted day and night at the house, and Karna slept last night on the sofa with his sword on the floor next to him. He would most likely come again for the night, since the sun was about to set, and he tried to talk with Pato or get Jatesy to smile. He was such a good man, just completely inexperienced with teenagers. Still, Mari was grateful for a capable officer in the house. And no garter activity had been detected around Edge. But obviously garters were working differently now. When she heard the fast hoofbeats coming down the cobblestone in front of her house, a wave of panic washed over her. She dropped the skirt in the warm water, dried her hands on her apron, and ran to the front of the house, prepared for anything, but hoping for nothing. Hysamum in the kitchen washing dishes followed closely behind. Jatesy and Pato got to the front door first, though, and watched tensely as the small man in a red messenger uniform dismounted. Hysamum stood behind Mari, her hands apprehensively in front of her face. But Mari took a bracing breath and walked out onto the porch. The messenger trotted up the stairs and handed her the envelope. "Mrs. Shem, I am to tell you that the colonel and the master sergeant are on their way." With that, he swiveled and marched smartly back to his horse. Mari whispered, "He said the colonel and master sergeant, right? That means they're still in the army. That means neither was demoted, and both are still alive." Relief rained down on her like the morning's thunderstorm. They were coming home, both of them. "Read it!" Jatesy exploded next to her. "The message, read it!" Pato snatched it out of Mari's hands and tried to rip it open. "Let me do it!" Jatesy grabbed the envelope from her brother. Mari could only stand there, tears of gratitude trickling down her face, while her teenagers battled in front of her on the porch. "Thank the Creator," Hysamum said, and went to sit down on the sofa to fan herself. Both alive, Mari thought, still unable to move. Both still all right, maybe. She closed her eyes and didn't hear more hoofbeats until her children cried out, "They're here!" Mari's eyes flew open to see 4 horses come to an abrupt stop in front of their house. Her eyes fell immediately on Perrin. There wasn't even a word to describe his appearance. She couldn't remember ever seeing him so exhausted, dirty, and scruffy. His uniform was a disgrace. His face was bloodied and unshaven. His cap was missing, and his hair looked as if he'd been wrestling a bale of hay. And he'd never looked more wonderful. Mari leaped down the stairs as quickly as he slid off his horse. She didn't care who saw her, and neither did he. He jumped over the fence, and she ran into his arms, where he picked her up in a fierce embrace. "I was so scared for you. I was sure you were going to do something terrible," she whispered in his ear, and she squeezed him with all of her strength. His normally earthy sweet smell was far more earthy than sweet today, but she could overlook that. "I'm sorry to admit that I was," he murmured back, "but I'm all right now. I'm home. Please forgive me one more time." "I already have." He kissed her cheek, but that wasn't good enough. He set her down, took her face in his hands, and kissed her properly, in front of everyone. Uncle Shem cleared his throat. "That is a little unfair, Colonel. The rest of us are lonely single men." "Poor Uncle Shem!" Jatesy laughed for the first time in days. She and Pato had come down the stairs and were waiting to hug their father, but caught Shem instead as he dismounted, each of them taking a side. Perrin released his wife and held out his arms to embrace his children. Mari wiped away happy tears as Perrin attempted to pick up both Jatesy and Pato, unsuccessfully. She chuckled and turned to Shem, grabbing his arm. "Oh, Shem, how can I ever thank you? What did you have to do?" she whispered. "Beat him up," Shem murmured back. Mari cringed. "Stop him from murdering an administrator?" Mari flinched. "Gadaman?" "Yes, how did you know?" "Just a lucky guess. What else?" she asked and bit her lip in dreadful anticipation. "Let's see," Shem started, but noticed Perrin and the children watching him. "I think I'll finish this later." Perrin nodded once at him, with warning in his eyes. Mari hugged Shem. "Well, thank you anyway." "Anything for my family," Shem whispered as he released her. Perrin cleared his throat. "Mari, a couple of introductions here." He gestured to the 2 soldiers who had also dismounted and now stood patiently at the gate. Mari had completely forgotten there was anyone else in the world besides her family. She looked over at the 2 other men, and her eyebrows went up. Perrin put a smile on his face that was slightly unnatural, but only Mari and Shem knew that. "May I present our new captain, Lemuel Thorne." "Captain," a startled Mari said, but tried to cover her surprise with the dinner smile. Captain Thorne sauntered over to the family with what Mari would classify as a triumphant swagger. Yes, quite the accomplishment, Perrin said, trying not to grit his teeth. For graduating top of his class and half a season early, he gets the rank of captain and his choice of first assignment. And guess where he chose? His expression turned grim. Captain Thorne was grinning fully now, but not at Mari. He was gazing earnestly at Jatsi. I chose to come to the edge of the world, just like Captain Shin did. He took Jatsi's hand and kissed it. Jatsi was taken aback. From the moment she recognized him, she stared at him with an indefinable look. But when the captain kissed her, she blushed and let escape a curious noise that was a blend of a giggle, a snort, and a guffaw. Thorne was enchanted. Shem was alarmed. Mari was troubled. Perrin was livid. He clenched his fist and released it before turning to the lieutenant, still waiting by the gate. And this is Lieutenant Afra. This poor unfortunate man has been enjoying the warmth of trades for the past year, and now has been shipped all the way north. He still won't tell me what he did wrong to earn this transfer. The lanky lieutenant smiled bashfully and nodded. It's a privilege to serve under Colonel Shin. Every soldier knows that. I wanted to be here as well. Perrin turned back to Mari. I hate to say it, but I know you need to go to the fort, she said, and you don't know when you'll be back. But it won't be long, I promise. Don't make promises you might not keep, she warned him. Colonel! A voice from up the road came running to them. It was Karna. I can't believe it! You're back! He stopped in front of the colonel and looked as if he might hug him. Perrin grinned, shook his hand warmly, then pulled him into a quick embrace. I saw the messenger leave, Karna said, as he patted Perrin on the back. I was on my way down for the evening and... Yes, I'm back. And Brillin, I'm sorry about that. Perrin gestured at the large black and purple bruise under Karna's eye. Karna waved his apology away. Perrin smiled. I trust everything here was well? We kept your house under constant watch, have detected no Garter activity, and the fort is in good condition, sir. Major Karna flashed a grin at Shem that said, Good job. I'm glad to hear that, and I'm also sorry, Colonel Shin told him. The major looked disappointed. Why? The colonel put on another smile, this one slightly pained. I've been spoiled for far too long. You've languished in my shadow for so many years, and you've done far too good a job. So good that you've been given your own command. Colonel Shin pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. The fort at Rivers is yours, Lieutenant Colonel Karna, and Captain Rigoff is also yours. Mari gasped to realize Tyria would be leaving Edge for the large village of Rivers. Karna was speechless as he opened the envelope and read the orders. I can't believe it, sir, he finally whispered. He grinned at Sergeant Zenas, who smiled sadly. Then Karna looked at the colonel, and his grin faded. Oh, sir, but I've been here so long. I can't imagine actually leaving. It's graduation day, Brillin, Perrin said cheerfully, but his eyes were clouded. And when you graduate, it's time to move on. Surely a Miss Robbing who delivers eggs to the Rivers Fort will be a bit happy about that as well. Karna began to smile again. She and I were talking, and she won't believe it. He choked out a laugh. You better send us an invitation to the wedding, Brillin. Mari kissed him on the cheek. We're going to miss you, but I'm so happy for you. It's been a long time in coming. Karna nodded and reread the orders, his face a manifestation of mixed emotions. I suppose you don't need me here tonight, Mrs. Shin. I'm afraid you leave tomorrow afternoon, so you best get back and get packing, Colonel Shin told him. I'll come with you to give Rigoff the news. And Neeks. Where's Grampy off to? Karna asked, surprised. Down to Grasses. Perrin's pained smile remained on his face. General Cush thought his old bones would appreciate something warmer. He won't be going alone, though. Private Healy will be accompanying him. Mari covered her mouth. Perrin turned to her. It'll be good for him. New place, no one knows his background. He'll truly get a fresh start. Just what Shem told him he needed. Mari's chin trembled, but she nodded. Jatsi sniffled. What about Sergeant Zenas? Pato asked timidly. Perrin smiled at his children. Seems the administrators think Zenas is best by my side. Right now they trust me only as far as Zenas can reach. Terrified horses couldn't drag him away. I know, I already tried something like that. The Shin family tried not to look too relieved in front of the new officers. We need to go, Perrin said, but I'll be back as soon as I can. As the other 3 soldiers mounted up, he gave his wife another quick kiss. She caught his arm. You've got a lot to explain to me tonight, you know, she whispered. Why all of these changes and why now? His answer couldn't have been more cryptic. Because the cats in the barn have found themselves a new wounded falcon. And that's the end of the chapter. Thank you.